The transport shuttle docked with the human vessel, and Commander Zekhar stepped through the airlock. His massive 8-foot frame filled the doorway, as thick gray skin caught the artificial lights. Scars covered his arms and face from 60 years of war across the galaxy. His yellow eyes swept the corridor with the practiced gaze of a predator. The humans waiting to greet him looked impossibly small and fragile. Their pink skin seemed thin as paper, their bodies soft and weak. Zekhar had fought alongside many alien species during his long career, but none had appeared so helpless as these creatures. A female human approached him. Her uniform marked her as the ship's captain, though she barely reached his chest. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable, Commander Zekhar. I am Captain Sarah Chen." Zekhar looked down at her and gave a single nod. His people did not waste time on lengthy greetings. "Captain, I am here for the military exchange program. We are honored to have a Vorthak warrior with us," Chen replied. "Let me show you to your quarters." As they walked through the ship, Zekhar noticed things that puzzled him. The medical bay was enormous, taking up nearly an entire deck. Emergency trauma stations lined every corridor. Strange machines hummed and beeped behind doors, marked with medical symbols. The smell of antiseptic was everywhere. "Your medical facilities are extensive," Zekhar observed as they passed another medical station. Captain Chen glanced at the equipment. "Humans require comprehensive medical support during military operations." Zekhar nodded to himself. These weak creatures probably injured themselves constantly. His own people, the Vorthak, rarely needed medical attention. They were apex predators from a harsh world where only the strongest survived. Their thick hide could stop small arms fire. Their claws could tear through steel plating. They healed quickly and felt little pain compared to other species. These humans possessed none of these advantages. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced healing. They looked like prey animals who had somehow learned to use tools. Zekhar wondered how they had survived long enough to reach the stars. "Your quarters," Chen announced, stopping at a reinforced door. "Meals are served at regular intervals in the mess hall. You are welcome to join us." "I will consider it," Zekhar replied, though he had little interest in socializing with these fragile beings. His room was smaller than usual but functional. The bed had been reinforced to support his weight. Zekhar sat heavily and considered his situation. The Galactic Military Council had created this exchange program to foster understanding between species. He had volunteered to learn how these humans had managed to avoid extinction in such a dangerous universe. That evening, curiosity drove him to the mess hall. The human food was bland and soft, nothing like the tough meat his people preferred. Around him, the humans chattered and laughed like younglings. On Vorthak vessels, warriors ate in respectful silence, always ready for combat. A young human soldier sat down across from him. "Commander, sir, I'm Private Martinez. It's an honor to serve alongside a legendary Vorthak warrior." Zekhar studied the youth. Martinez appeared barely adult, with thin arms and soft hands unmarked by real combat. "You have seen battle, Private Martinez?" "Yes, sir. 3 tours against the Hive Collective." This surprised Zekhar. The Hive Collective was among the most dangerous enemies in known space. Insect-like aliens that attacked in overwhelming swarms, they had destroyed entire civilizations. Most species either crushed the hive immediately or were completely overrun within weeks. 3 tours? How long were these deployments? 8 months each, sir, though my last tour went 11 months when relief forces couldn't reach us. Zekhar's eyes narrowed. Vorthak military doctrine emphasized swift, decisive action. Fight hard, win quickly, minimize casualties. The idea of spending nearly a year fighting the same enemy seemed wrong. "Your commanders abandoned you for 11 months?" he asked. Martinez shrugged casually. "That's how long it took to clear the hive from the sector, sir. We had to make sure we got every last drone." After Martinez left, Zekhar sat thinking. Something did not add up. If humans were as weak as they appeared, how had this young soldier survived nearly 3 years fighting the hive? How had any of them survived? Over the following days, he observed the human crew more carefully. He watched them work in the engine room, where temperatures would have cooked most species alive. They wore protective suits, but moved efficiently in conditions that would slow even his hardy people. He studied their training exercises. The humans practiced fighting techniques focused on endurance rather than overwhelming power. They trained to fight while exhausted, injured, and hungry. They practiced scenarios where everything went wrong and they had to continue anyway. This approach puzzled him completely. Vorthak training emphasized becoming an unstoppable force that crushed enemies quickly. They did not train to fight when weakened or disadvantaged. Why would they need to? Strong warriors avoided such situations through superior tactics and firepower, but these humans seemed to expect everything to go wrong. They prepared for worst-case scenarios, as if they were normal occurrences. Zekhar found this deeply disturbing. Later that week, human officers invited him to observe their tactical planning session. They were analyzing reports from recent battles against various enemies across the sector. Zekhar listened as they discussed strategies that made no sense to him. "The key is lasting longer than they can," explained Lieutenant Rodriguez, a scarred human with tired eyes. "Most species expect quick resolution to conflicts. When wars drag on for months or years, they start making critical mistakes." "Years?" Zekhar interrupted. "You plan for conflicts lasting years?" The humans exchanged meaningful glances. Captain Chen spoke carefully. "Commander, human military history includes many lengthy campaigns. We have learned to prepare for extended operations." "This is inefficient," Zekhar declared. "Proper doctrine calls for concentrated force, rapid strikes, decisive victory. Quick resolution minimizes casualties and resource expenditure." Lieutenant Rodriguez smiled grimly. "That works perfectly when you're stronger than your enemy, sir. But sometimes, you're not. Sometimes all you can do is hold on longer than they can." Zekhar felt growing confusion. Everything these humans described violated basic military principles. Yet they were still here, still fighting, still alive. Somehow, their backward methods actually worked. That night, he stood in his quarters staring out at the stars. For the first time in his long military career, he wondered if there were aspects of warfare his people had never encountered. The humans were physically weak, but they were also still alive after facing enemies that should have destroyed them completely. Perhaps weakness and defeat were not the same thing. Perhaps these strange humans understood something about survival that his people had never needed to learn. Zekhar decided he would observe more carefully and try to understand what he was missing about these peculiar creatures. 3 days after arriving aboard the human vessel, Zekhar received notice of an important briefing. All senior officers were required to attend. Captain Chen had called a meeting to discuss their next assignment. Zekhar made his way to the briefing room, curious about how humans planned military operations. The briefing room was plain and practical. A large display screen dominated one wall, showing star charts and tactical information. Officers filed in and took their seats around a metal table. Zekhar noticed that several humans carried small personal items. Photographs, letters, small pieces of jewelry. This seemed odd to him. Vorthak warriors never brought personal belongings to military briefings. Such things were distractions from the business of war. Captain Chen stood at the front of the room as the last officers arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received our orders. The Hive Collective has taken control of Zirion Prime." The star map changed to show a mining world on the edge of human space. Red symbols marked hive positions scattered across the planet's surface. Zekhar studied the display with professional interest. The planet looked heavily fortified. "Zirion Prime fell to the hive 6 months ago," Chen continued. "The mining infrastructure remains intact, which means they are using the world as a breeding ground. Intelligence estimates suggest over 2 million hive drones have established themselves planetside." Zekhar felt impressed despite himself. 2 million enemies represented a significant military challenge, even for his experienced people. This would require careful planning and substantial force commitment. "What is our timeline for liberation?" asked Lieutenant Rodriguez from across the table. "Current projections suggest 8 to 12 months for complete planetary liberation," Chen replied. Zekhar's jaw dropped open. He stared at the captain in disbelief. Did you say 8 to 12 months? There must be an error in translation. No error, Commander. 8 to 12 months is our estimated operational timeline, but this makes no sense. With proper orbital bombardment, followed by rapid ground assault, any planet can be secured within days or weeks at most. The human officers looked at each other with expressions Zekhar could not read. Captain Chen turned to face him directly. Commander, we have been fighting the Hive Collective for 3 standard years. We have learned through experience that orbital bombardment only drives them deeper underground, making them much harder to eliminate completely. 3 years. The words hit Zekhar like a physical blow. His people had never fought a single conflict lasting 3 years. The longest Vorthak war in recent history had lasted 4 months, and military historians still studied it as an example of excessive campaign duration. How is this possible? He asked. 3 years against one enemy force? The Hive adapts rapidly to conventional tactics, explained Commander Torres, a human with gray hair and exhausted eyes. When we strike them hard and fast, they scatter into underground networks and wait us out. When we apply overwhelming force, they dig deeper and become nearly impossible to root out. They are extremely patient adversaries, more patient than most species can tolerate, added Rodriguez. But we have learned to be more patient than they are. Zekhar struggled to process this information. Patience during battle was not something his people valued or practiced. Vorthak military doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and decisive action. Patience meant giving enemies time to prepare defenses, gather reinforcements, and set traps. Patience was how you lost wars, not won them. This approach seems highly inefficient, he said carefully, trying not to give offense. Chen nodded understandingly. It would be inefficient against most enemies, Commander. But the Hive Collective is not like most enemies. They have successfully overrun 17 different species in the past 50 years. Each of those civilizations attempted rapid, decisive action against them. All 17 failed completely. So you deliberately choose to fight slowly instead? We choose to fight intelligently, Torres replied. We studied every species the Hive destroyed. They all made the same fundamental mistake. They tried to end conflicts quickly, before the Hive could fully adapt to their tactics. But the Hive always adapts eventually. The only way to defeat them is to adapt faster, and then outlast their adaptation cycles. Zekhar looked around the briefing room. These humans spoke of multi-year conflicts as if they were normal business. They planned for months of continuous combat, the way other species planned for brief skirmishes. Everything about their approach violated his understanding of proper military thinking. Allow me to suggest an alternative strategy, he said. Concentrated orbital bombardment, followed by rapid deployment of elite ground forces. Establish multiple beachheads simultaneously. Advance quickly through all sectors. Eliminate resistance before they can organize effective defenses. This is proven Vorthak doctrine that has succeeded in hundreds of campaigns. The humans listened respectfully while he outlined his plan. When he finished, Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up carefully. Sir, with great respect, that exact approach has been attempted before. The Kraxi Empire tried it 2 years ago with a force 3 times larger than ours. They lost 3 complete battle groups trying to crack Hive defenses using overwhelming force. The Kraxi are not Vorthak, Zekhar replied with stiff pride. No, sir, they certainly are not, Rodriguez agreed diplomatically. But they possess superior firepower and stronger ground troops than we humans do. If they could not succeed with overwhelming force, we must find different methods. Different methods. Zekhar had never needed different methods before. Vorthak military forces were among the most feared in the known galaxy. When they committed to battle, enemies either surrendered immediately or died fighting. There was no middle ground, no extended campaigns, no wars of gradual attrition. How do your troops maintain morale during such prolonged conflicts? He asked. The humans exchanged those strange looks again. Captain Chen answered slowly. Experience, I suppose. Commander. Human history includes many extended wars. We have learned to sustain ourselves mentally and physically during long campaigns, to find strength in endurance, rather than relying solely on initial aggression. You have fought wars lasting this long before? Much longer, in some cases, Torres said quietly. There was a conflict on our homeworld called the Second World War that lasted 6 years. Another called the 100 Years' War that continued intermittently for over a century. Zekar stared at him in shock. A war lasting over a century seemed impossible to imagine. How could any civilization survive such extended destruction? How could soldiers fight for years without suffering complete psychological breakdown? Perhaps you could share some Vorthak tactical wisdom with us, Chen suggested diplomatically. We are always interested in learning new approaches to difficult problems. Zekar straightened with renewed confidence. Vorthak doctrine is elegant and effective. We concentrate overwhelming force at the enemy's weakest point. We strike hard, strike fast, and show no mercy until victory is achieved. We end battles before enemies can react or adapt to our methods. The longest Vorthak campaign in recent memory lasted 4 months, and military analysts still consider that unusually extended. 4 months. Rodriguez repeated thoughtfully. That is approximately how long we typically spend on preliminary reconnaissance and defensive preparation before beginning actual assault operations. The comment struck Zekar like a weapon. These humans spent more time preparing for their attacks than his people spent on entire wars. They treated 4 months as a brief preliminary phase rather than an extended campaign. The briefing continued with detailed logistical discussions. Humans talked about supply lines that would need to function for months. They planned for casualty rates that assumed steady losses over extended periods. They discussed rotation schedules to keep troops mentally fresh during campaigns that would outlast most species' military careers. When the meeting finally ended, Zekar walked slowly back to his quarters. Everything about human military thinking challenged his most basic assumptions about warfare. They planned for failure, prepared for worst-case scenarios, and somehow achieved victory anyway. That night, he accessed the ship's computer system to research this Second World War that Torres had mentioned. What he discovered deeply disturbed him. Humans fighting in frozen cities for months, eating anything they could find to survive, dying by thousands every day, yet somehow never surrendering. For the first time since joining the exchange program, Zekar wondered if his proud people had simply never been truly tested in battle. Perhaps overwhelming force only worked when you possessed it. Perhaps these fragile-looking humans had learned something crucial about what to do when overwhelming force was not available. 3 weeks into the ground campaign on Zirion Prime, Zekar witnessed something that shattered every assumption he held about warfare and biology. The human squad was trapped in the ruins of a processing facility. Hive drones had surrounded them and cut off supply lines 6 days earlier. No food deliveries, no medical supplies, no ammunition resupply, no reinforcements. By every principle of Vorthak military doctrine, the squad should have withdrawn immediately or died attempting to break through enemy lines. But they were still fighting. Zekar observed through his enhanced vision scope from a distant ridge. Private Johnson operated a heavy plasma cannon despite his left arm hanging at an impossible angle. The bone was clearly broken in multiple places, yet he continued firing. He braced the massive weapon against his body and used his functioning arm to aim. Every shot must have sent shockwaves of pain through his damaged limb, but his targeting remained precise and effective. Sergeant Williams coordinated defensive positions while blood soaked through her combat uniform from a deep abdominal wound. She had fashioned a crude bandage from torn fabric, but it was clearly inadequate for such serious trauma. Her face showed the pale color of significant blood loss. Yet her tactical commands remained sharp and logical. She moved carefully but steadily, directing her remaining troops with hand signals when speaking became too painful. The entire squad had been awake for over 70 hours straight. They swayed on their feet like walking corpses, stumbling occasionally from exhaustion. Their movements were slow and unsteady, but they never stopped moving. When waves of hive drones rushed their defensive positions, the humans fought them back with mechanical efficiency despite their obviously deteriorated condition. Zekar activated his communicator. "Captain Chen, The surrounded squad requires immediate medical evacuation. Their injuries are life-threatening, and their condition is severely compromised. Understood, Commander, came Chen's voice through the static. But they have refused evacuation offers 3 times already. They insist they can maintain their position. Maintain their position? Zekhar stared at the humans through his scope. They are barely conscious. Any rational warrior would have withdrawn hours ago. I know it appears desperate, Chen replied. But our forces have held similar positions, under comparable conditions many times before. Comparable conditions? Zekhar could not imagine conditions more hopeless than what he was observing. These humans were fighting while injured, starving, exhausted, and completely surrounded. It violated every principle of sensible military behavior he had ever learned. When relief forces finally reached the trapped squad, Zekhar immediately moved down to meet them. Private Johnson sat against a demolished wall, while medics examined his mangled arm. His face was gray with pain and fatigue, but he was methodically cleaning his weapon in preparation for the next engagement. Private, Zekhar said, approaching carefully. Your injury requires immediate surgical intervention. You should be in the medical bay. Johnson looked up with bloodshot eyes. Sir, it's just a broken arm. I can still operate weapon systems effectively. Just a broken arm? Among Zekhar's people, such an injury would require immediate evacuation and several days of recovery time. You have been fighting for 6 days with this injury. Yes, sir. Sergeant Williams has been hurt much worse, and she's still commanding the unit. Zekhar looked toward Sergeant Williams, who was currently arguing with a medic about returning to active duty despite her severe abdominal wound. The medic insisted she needed emergency surgery. Williams insisted she needed to rejoin her squad immediately. This behavior is not normal, Zekhar told Captain Chen when she arrived at the scene. Your soldiers are fighting with injuries that would completely disable most known species. Chen studied his expression carefully for several moments. Commander, I believe it is time you learned more about human military history. Would you join me in my quarters this evening? There are things you need to see if you want to understand how we fight. That evening, Chen activated her personal computer terminal and accessed historical archives. What I am going to show you may be difficult to process, she said, but it will explain why humans approach warfare differently than other species. The first video showed ancient human warriors at a place called Thermopylae. 300 soldiers holding a narrow mountain pass against an enemy force of thousands. They fought for 3 days, knowing they could not possibly win. Every single one died rather than retreat, buying precious time for their allies to escape and regroup. This battle occurred over 2,000 years ago, Chen explained, but it demonstrates something fundamental about human psychology. Sometimes we fight not because we can win, but because fighting is necessary regardless of the outcome. The next recording showed soldiers from something called World War I. Humans living in muddy trenches for years, fighting through poison gas attacks and constant artillery bombardment. Disease killed as many as enemy weapons, but they maintained their positions through 4 years of continuous warfare. Then came footage from World War II. Humans defending cities while bombs fell every night for months. Citizens sleeping in underground tunnels, emerging each morning to rebuild whatever had been destroyed overnight. Soldiers fighting through Russian winter with inadequate supplies, eating grass and boiled leather to survive when food ran out. But what completely destroyed Zekhar's understanding was footage from the Hive invasion of Earth 50 years earlier. The Battle of Saragossa lasted 18 months of continuous urban combat. Humans fought in the ruins of their own cities, while hive swarms darkened the sky overhead. Children barely 12 years old manned defensive positions. Civilians operated weapons factories in underground bunkers while the city burned above them. One video clip showed a human medic treating wounded soldiers while her own leg was nearly severed at the thigh. She had tied a tourniquet around her leg to control bleeding and continued working. When other soldiers tried to evacuate her to safety, she refused, insisting that other wounded people needed immediate attention more than she did. This cannot be real, Zekhar whispered. Every piece of footage is authentic, Chen said quietly. Every battle, Every act of endurance you are seeing actually happened. This is what humans do when we are pushed beyond normal limits. We discover that the limits were not as absolute as we thought. More footage followed. Humans fighting for years in jungles, deserts, and frozen wastelands. Always outnumbered, always outgunned, somehow finding ways to continue when any logical analysis suggested immediate surrender. They turned civilian buildings into fortresses, schools into hospitals, and ordinary citizens into soldiers when circumstances demanded it. Your species fights until victory or death, Chen continued. That is honorable and usually effective. But humans have learned to fight until victory, death, or until we discover a third option that nobody anticipated. We have learned to turn our own suffering into a tactical advantage. Turn suffering into an advantage? The ability to function while injured, to continue when exhausted, to fight when everything has gone wrong. These become weapons when your enemies cannot match them. Most species assume that warfare has logical boundaries. Humans have learned that sometimes the only way to win is to go beyond what anyone believes is possible. Zekhar stared at the screen showing the aftermath of Saragossa. Humans emerging from 18 months of underground fighting. Thin and scarred but alive. They immediately began reconstruction efforts while hive forces retreated in confusion. The insects had never encountered an enemy that simply refused to break under any amount of pressure. You did not merely defeat the hive, he said slowly. You taught them that some victories cost more than they are worth. Exactly. The hive expects enemies to fight rationally, with clear limits on acceptable losses. But human limits are not always rational. We have survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that lasted generations. When the universe demands more than any species should be able to give, humans find ways to give it anyway. Zekhar's military conditioning, built over 60 years of successful campaigns, began to crack and crumble. His people were skilled warriors, with superior physical capabilities, but they had never been tested the way these humans had been tested. They had never needed to find strength beyond their natural strength. This explains your extensive medical facilities, he said slowly. Yes. We plan for severe casualties, because we have learned that surviving casualties often leads to ultimate victory. This explains why you train to fight while disadvantaged. Yes, because disadvantage is often temporary if you can endure it long enough. This explains why your campaigns last years instead of weeks. Yes, because we have learned that time itself can become a weapon if you understand how to use it properly. Zekhar sat in stunned silence for long minutes, trying to process what he had learned. Everything he thought he understood about military science was incomplete. His people fought until victory or death because they were strong enough to achieve victory quickly. But what happened when quick victory was impossible? What happened when strength alone was insufficient? These humans had discovered the answer. When you could not win fast, you won slowly. When you could not overpower enemies, you outlasted them. When logic said you should surrender, you redefined what logic meant. After viewing the historical footage, Zekhar began observing human behavior with completely different eyes. Details that had seemed strange or inefficient before suddenly made perfect sense when understood properly. During meal periods, he watched humans carefully check that wounded comrades received adequate food portions before taking their own. When supply deliveries were delayed, they shared everything equally, often giving extra rations to whoever appeared to need them most. Zekhar had initially thought this was wasteful. Strong warriors should eat first to maintain peak fighting capability. But he was beginning to understand that humans measured strength very differently than his people did. He studied their medical procedures more closely. Human medics always treated the most severely wounded soldiers first, regardless of rank or military importance. They spent precious resources on troops who might never return to combat, instead of prioritizing those who could quickly resume fighting duties. By Vorthak logic, this approach wasted valuable medical supplies. By human logic, it served a completely different purpose. Why do you risk so much to save soldiers who may never recover completely? He asked Dr. Martinez during one of his visits to the medical bay. The human physician looked up from treating severe plasma burns on a young private's chest. Because that is what we do. Commander, we never abandon our people, no matter how bad their situation becomes. even when attempting rescue operations puts healthy soldiers at additional risk? Especially then. When our troops know we will come for them regardless of circumstances, they take risks they would never consider otherwise. They hold positions longer, fight harder, and push further into dangerous territory. Trust becomes a force multiplier that affects every tactical decision. Zekhar pondered this concept. Vorthak military doctrine taught that individual soldiers were acceptable losses for achieving greater strategic objectives. But humans seemed to believe that treating individuals as expendable actually weakened overall unit effectiveness. It contradicted everything he had learned about command principles, yet their approach appeared to produce superior results. He also observed their ceremonies for fallen comrades. Even during active combat operations, humans took precious time to honor their dead. They spoke meaningful words over bodies, collected personal belongings to send to families, and shared stories about those who had died. Zekhar had originally viewed this as time wasted when they should have been fighting. "The dead are dead," he said to Lieutenant Rodriguez during one such ceremony. "These rituals serve no practical tactical purpose." Rodriguez turned to face him with serious eyes. "They serve the most important tactical purpose possible, sir. They tell living soldiers that their lives have meaning beyond military objectives, that they will be remembered as individuals, not just casualties. A warrior who knows he will not be forgotten can accomplish things that someone fighting purely for survival cannot." These observations helped Zekhar understand human endurance on an intellectual level, but he had never experienced it personally. That situation changed dramatically during the assault on Hive Complex 7. The facility was a massive underground installation that had taken human forces 6 weeks to reach. Hive drones poured from tunnel entrances like dark water, attacking in seemingly endless waves. Zekhar fought alongside human troops, using his natural advantages to crush enemies that individual humans struggled to defeat. Then a Hive warrior broke through their defensive lines. The creature stood twice as tall as an average human, covered in natural, chitinous armor. Razor-sharp claws could slice through metal plating, and corrosive acid dripped from its mandible weapons. Zekhar moved immediately to intercept it, confident in his superior strength and decades of combat experience. The battle was intense but relatively brief. Zekhar's experience and natural weapons gave him significant advantages, and he managed to drive his claws deep into the creature's vital organs. But as the Hive warrior died, its claws raked across Zekhar's side, tearing through his tough skin and exposing several internal organs to the air. Pain hit him like a physical wall. By every Vorthak instinct, he should immediately withdraw for medical treatment. His species biology demanded that seriously wounded individuals seek safety to prevent further injury. This was not cowardice but practical evolutionary programming. Badly injured warriors became dangerous liabilities to their units. But all around him, human soldiers continued fighting with injuries equally severe or worse. Private Chen had a deep gash across her back that exposed white bone. Yet she maintained operation of critical communications equipment. Sergeant Morrison's left hand was completely mangled, but he directed artillery coordinates with his remaining functional hand, while medics applied emergency bandages. They moved carefully but steadily, pushing through pain that would have incapacitated most known species. For the first time in his entire military career, Zekhar ignored his biological imperative to seek immediate safety. He pressed one massive hand against his wound to slow the bleeding and continued fighting with his other arm. Every movement sent waves of agony through his body, but he forced himself to keep going. The experience transformed something fundamental in his understanding. He was not just learning human tactics. He was discovering what it meant to function beyond the point where normal function should be impossible. He was experiencing what humans called second wind, strength that came from somewhere deeper than normal physical reserves. "Commander, you require immediate medical attention," Dr. Martinez called to him during a brief lull between Hive attacks. "I can continue fighting," Zekhar replied, surprising himself with the words that came from his mouth. "Sir, you are losing significant amounts of blood. Then stop the bleeding here. I will not abandon my assigned position." Dr. Martinez stared at him for a moment, then nodded with what appeared to be approval. She quickly applied emergency medical patches while Zekhar remained in fighting stance, ready for the next wave of enemy drones. As she worked, he noticed something crucial about the human soldiers around him. They were not simply enduring their injuries through willpower alone. They were actually using their ability to endure as a tactical weapon. Their capacity to keep fighting when logic said they should stop confused and demoralized enemy forces. The hive drones expected wounded enemies to weaken and retreat according to normal biological patterns. When humans did neither, it disrupted hive battle plans and created advantages that should not have existed. The engagement lasted 14 hours of continuous combat. By the end, most human personnel had sustained injuries of some kind. But they had successfully held all strategic positions and achieved every tactical objective. Zekar had fought longer while more seriously wounded than ever before in his 60-year military career. He should have felt exhausted and weakened. Instead, he experienced something completely new. A strange form of strength that emerged from having pushed past his own perceived limitations. He finally understood why humans trained to fight, while disadvantaged. They were not preparing to be weak. They were preparing to discover new sources of power. After the battle concluded, he sat in the medical bay, while Dr. Martinez properly cleaned and treated his wounds. Around him, other injured soldiers shared stories, checked on each other's condition, and began planning for their next mission. There was no shame in being wounded. No loss of status for requiring medical assistance. "How do you do it?" he asked Dr. Martinez, as she carefully sealed his damaged tissue. "How do you continue functioning when every biological signal tells you to stop?" She paused thoughtfully in her work. "Mind over matter, I suppose. When you understand that people are depending on you, that giving up means others will die, you find ways to keep going. The body has limits, but human will does not always respect those limits. But surely there must be some absolute breaking point. Everyone has ultimate boundaries." "Certainly," she agreed. "But humans have discovered that most boundaries we think are absolute actually are not. They are just the first wall we encounter. There are usually more walls behind that one, and more walls behind those. The secret is learning to climb walls instead of stopping when you hit them." That night, Zekar lay in his bunk thinking about walls and boundaries. His people had never needed to climb walls because they had always been strong enough to break through them directly. But what happened when you encountered walls too strong to break? What happened when overwhelming force proved insufficient? These humans had found the answer. When you could not break the wall, you learned to climb over it. When you could not overpower your problems, you learned to outlast them. When normal strength was not enough, you discovered abnormal strength. 4 months after the ground campaign began, Zirion Prime was finally liberated from hive control. The victory did not come through overwhelming firepower or brilliant tactical maneuvers. It came through simple, relentless pressure that never stopped, never wavered, and never accepted defeat as a possibility. Zekar stood among the ruins of what had been the primary hive command complex, watching human engineers already beginning reconstruction operations. Smoke still rose from destroyed buildings scattered across the battlefield. Bodies of hive drones littered the ground like fallen leaves. The air carried the smell of burned metal, spilled chemicals, and death. Yet human soldiers were setting up communication networks while civilian contractors prepared to restore the mining facilities. "How did you know this approach would succeed?" he asked Captain Chen, as they surveyed the devastated landscape together. Chen looked exhausted but deeply satisfied. Her uniform was torn and stained from months of continuous fighting. Like most human personnel, she carried several new scars from the extended campaign. "We did not know it would work," she admitted honestly. "We hoped it would work." "You hoped?" "The Hive Collective has successfully conquered 17 different species over the past 50 years, she explained patiently. Every one of those civilizations tried to defeat them, using superior technology or overwhelming military force. All 17 approaches failed completely. We decided to try something fundamentally different." Zekar thought about the past 4 months of grinding warfare. The humans had not attempted to destroy hive forces quickly through concentrated attacks. Instead, they had applied steady pressure across multiple fronts, never retreating, never allowing the insect forces a moment of rest or opportunity to regroup. When hive drones attacked human positions, The humans absorbed casualties and maintained their ground. When hive forces tried to wait them out, the humans proved they could wait much longer. You achieved victory through pure endurance, he said slowly. We achieved victory by changing the fundamental nature of the conflict, Chen corrected him. The hive evolved to fight against warriors who follow traditional military logic. They expect enemies to fight hard and fast until someone achieves decisive victory. But we fought like survivors instead of warriors. We fought slowly and steadily until the job was completely finished. The distinction was more important than it first appeared. Warriors fought to defeat specific enemies in particular battles. Survivors fought to outlast whatever problems the universe presented to them. The hive had developed effective countermeasures against warriors over decades of successful expansion, but they had no experience dealing with true survivors. Zekar observed a group of human medics providing medical treatment to captured hive drones alongside their own wounded personnel. This behavior continued to puzzle him deeply. Why do you offer aid to defeated enemies? Because the war is over, explained Dr. Martinez, who was supervising the medical operations. These drones were following their biological programming during combat. Now that their command structure has been eliminated, they are simply injured creatures who require assistance. This represented another uniquely human approach to conflict resolution. Most species either enslaved, defeated enemies, or eliminated them entirely to prevent future problems. Humans seem to believe that enemies could genuinely stop being enemies when fighting concluded. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached their group, his arm immobilized in a medical sling from injuries sustained during the final assault. Captain, we just received communication from Galactic Command Headquarters. The Hive Collective has completely withdrawn from the entire Zerion system. All ships, all remaining ground forces, all support personnel, completely gone. Chen raised her eyebrows in surprise. Complete withdrawal? The Hive never withdraws from conquered territory. No, ma'am, they do not. This represents the first recorded instance of voluntary Hive retreat in documented galactic history. Intelligence analysis suggests we disrupted their operational patterns so severely that they cannot formulate effective countermeasures. They do not understand how to respond to enemies who will not break under any circumstances. Zekar felt the full significance of this development. The Hive Collective had been expanding across the galaxy for decades, consuming civilization after civilization with ruthless efficiency. They had never retreated, never abandoned conquered worlds, never shown any sign of uncertainty or confusion, until they encountered humans who refused to follow expected patterns. You accomplished more than simple victory, he said with growing amazement. You taught them to experience fear. We taught them that some targets cost more than they are worth, Chen replied thoughtfully. The Hive will reconsider very carefully before attacking human territories again. They understand now that we will make any victory so expensive that it becomes meaningless. That evening, Zekar made a decision that would have seemed impossible when he first stepped aboard the human vessel months earlier. He requested a private meeting with Captain Chen in her personal quarters. I wish to submit a formal request for permanent transfer to serve with human military forces, he announced without preliminary discussion. Chen looked genuinely surprised by his statement. Commander, that represents a very significant decision. May I ask what motivates this request? Zekar considered carefully how to explain his transformation. I have spent 60 years learning how to fight effectively. But you, humans, have taught me something far more valuable. You have taught me how to survive when fighting is not enough. There is a crucial difference between these skills. How so? Fighting is about defeating specific enemies in particular circumstances. Surviving is about outlasting whatever challenges the universe presents, regardless of their nature. I believed they were the same thing, but I was wrong. My people fight until we achieve victory or die trying. You fight until the necessary work is completed, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. When traditional victory becomes impossible, you invent new definitions of what victory means. Chen nodded slowly with understanding. And you want to learn more about this survival approach? I want to understand what makes it possible. How do humans find strength beyond normal strength? How do you continue functioning when logic insists you should stop? How do you transform suffering from a weakness into a tactical weapon? Those are difficult questions, Commander. Yes, which is exactly why I need extended time to discover the answers. Your people have mastered something that mine have never been forced to master. We have been fortunate enough to be strong enough that we never faced enemies who pushed us beyond our natural limits. But fortune can change without warning. Chen studied his scarred face thoughtfully. You are discussing more than military tactics, are you not? Yes. I am discussing a fundamental way of thinking that allows impossible things to become possible. When humans say we will hold this position, it is not optimistic planning but simple statement of fact. When humans say we will not surrender, it is not emotional bravado but absolute truth. This represents something deeper than military doctrine. It is who we are. Chen said quietly. We are survivors before we are warriors. We have been forced to become survivors to continue existing. I want to learn how to be a true survivor, Zekhar said with conviction. My people may face challenges someday that pure strength cannot solve. If that time comes, I want to be prepared to teach them what I learned from you. Chen remained quiet for several minutes, considering his words carefully. I will forward your request to Command Authority, but I should warn you that learning to survive like humans do is not simply about tactics or training procedures. It changes how you see everything. Your own limitations, your relationship with pain, your definition of what is possible. Are you certain you want that kind of transformation? I am completely certain. I have seen what humans accomplish when everything goes wrong and traditional solutions fail. I want to be capable of that kind of accomplishment. The following morning, Zekhar received approval for his transfer request. He would remain with human forces indefinitely, learning their methods while sharing Vorthak knowledge in return. He spent his final day on Zirion Prime, walking through the reconstruction areas. Human engineers worked alongside alien specialists and even reformed hive drones to rebuild everything the war had destroyed. Children played games in temporary shelters, while their parents planned new permanent homes. Medical teams treated anyone who needed help, regardless of species or previous allegiance. This too represented uniquely human behavior, the determination to build and create as fiercely as they fought and destroyed. Other species might have left Zerion Prime as a monument to their military victory. Humans saw it as a home that needed to be restored to full functionality. As his transport prepared to depart, Zekhar looked back at the planet one final time. Smoke still rose from some damaged areas, but green construction lights marked rebuilding projects across the entire surface. Humans were already planting agricultural areas in former battlefields, establishing schools for their children, and planning for a future that extended far beyond the war. He finally understood what made humans so dangerous to their enemies. It was not their weapons, their tactics, or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything, defeat, death, or destruction, represented a permanent condition. They treated every ending as a new beginning, every loss as motivation to try again, every impossibility as a challenge to overcome through persistence. When the universe said no, humans heard not yet. When logic said impossible, humans heard difficult. When enemies said surrender, humans heard try harder. That was their true weapon. Not strength, but the inability to remain broken. Not power, but resilience that transformed suffering into fuel for greater efforts. Zekhar had thought he was a warrior. Now he was learning to become something far more dangerous. A survivor who understood that the only real limits were the ones you accepted.